This summary is a faithful representation of the arguments, structure, and intent of Rodney Stark's 2009 God's Battalions, The Case for the Crusades book. It presents his case as he makes it, without interjection of external historical debate or reinterpretation. Stark argues that the Crusades were not an unprovoked act of Christian aggression, imperialism, or proto-colonialism. Instead, he frames them as a delayed and defensive military response to over 4 centuries of relentless Islamic conquest, colonization, and persecution of Christian populations. He presents the Crusades as a war to recover lost Christian territory and to protect the beleaguered Byzantine Empire, seen by the West as a Christian sibling under existential threat. Part 1. The March to War, the Islamic Conquests. Stark begins not in 1095 with Pope Urban II's call, but in the 7th century with the rise of Islam. This is the bedrock of his argument. A narrative of conquest. He details the rapid and violent expansion of Muslim armies out of Arabia, conquering vast, ancient Christian territories. The Holy Land from 633 to 640, Egypt and North Africa from 639 to 698, most of Spain from 711, Anatolia, Asia Minor, via relentless raids and the critical Battle of Manzikert in 1071, which broke Byzantine defensive power. Colonization. Stark explicitly uses this term. He argues these were not just military victories, but acts of colonization involving the displacement of local elites, the imposition of Muslim rule, the dhimmi system, and the gradual Islamization of the landscape. The Christian world, he contends, was losing for centuries. Persecution as a motive. He cites specific instances of persecution under Islamic rule, particularly the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre by Caliph al-Hakim in 1009, and reports of harassment and violence against Christian pilgrims. For Stark, the Crusaders' goal to secure pilgrimage access was a legitimate, defensive response to this insecurity. Part 2. The Crusades themselves. Stark walks through the major Crusades, emphasizing the following points consistent with his thesis. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099, a response to a plea for help. Trigger, Emperor Alexius I of Byzantium's direct appeal to the Pope for military aid against the invading Seljuk Turks, whom Stark portrays as particularly brutal. Urban II's call at Clermont is thus framed as answering a Christian ally in distress. Religious zeal, not greed. Stark downplays material motives. He emphasizes the immense cost, risk, and likelihood of death for Crusaders, arguing this proves sincere religious commitment. The landless younger son theory is largely dismissed. Military achievement. He portrays the success of the First Crusade as a miraculous against-all-odds victory achieved by a fractious coalition driven by faith. The Crusader states, or Outremer, a defensive colony. He describes them as a vulnerable beachhead in a hostile sea, constantly needing reinforcement from the West. Their architecture, massive castles, is presented as evidence of a defensive, besieged mentality. Subsequent Crusades, holding the line, and failure. The loss of Edessa in 1144 that sparked the Second Crusade is presented as proof of the constant Islamic pressure. Stark is critical of the Third and Fourth Crusades' leadership and deviations, but maintains their original defensive casus belli remained valid from the European perspective. The failure of later Crusades is attributed to poor strategy, logistics, and leadership, not the illegitimacy of the cause. Stark directly contests what he sees as modern myths. Against colonialist aggression, The Crusaders were not the first colonists in the region. They were attempting to reconquer lands lost to Islamic colonization. He reverses the colonial narrative. Against unprovoked attack, the provocation was 4 centuries long. The Crusades were a counterattack. Against Christian barbarism versus Islamic tolerance, Stark aggressively challenges the idealized view of Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, and the Islamic world as paragons of tolerance and learning. He argues Christian and Jewish dhimmi status was one of systemic legal inferiority and periodic persecution, not enlightened coexistence. The cultural and scientific achievements of Muslim Spain were largely the work of Christian and Jewish subjects, not products of Islamic theology. He contrasts this with the Crusader states, where Muslims were allowed to practice their faith and maintain their own courts, a point often made by other historians to show pragmatic rule, which Stark uses to rebut claims of unique Crusader brutality. Stark concludes that the Crusades were a morally justified, defensive war within the context of the medieval worldview. They were a necessary and rational, if often poorly executed response to a genuine threat against Christian lands, peoples, and the rights of pilgrims. The eventual failure of the Crusader project does not, for Stark, invalidate the righteousness of its original cause. Polemical tone. The book is explicitly a case for the Crusades. It is a work of argumentative historiography, not a neutral textbook-style survey. Stark selects evidence and emphasizes narratives that support his defensive thesis. Sociological lens. As a sociologist of religion, Stark focuses on motives, religious faith, demographics, and large-scale historical forces, civilizational clash, over deep military or political analysis. Truthful presentation. This summary reflects Stark's core argument, a conscious effort to reverse the popular perception of the Crusades as the first great crime of Western imperialism, and to recenter the historical narrative on the prior and precipitating Islamic conquests. He presents the Crusaders as acting from a position of perceived weakness and retaliation, not one of nascent imperial strength. In essence, Stark's book is a sustained plea to judge the Crusades not by modern secular ethics, but within the context of a centuries-long, two-way struggle for religious and territorial dominance, in which Christendom, he argues, was finally punching back.